The sky burned red like an open wound, veins of smoke trailing across its bleeding surface. Below, the ruins of Earth's once great cities lay sprawled like corpses beneath a shadow that stretched across the horizon. The Zenar consortium had arrived. Massive warships hovered above the surface, their grotesque hulls dark and jagged, the metallic edges like serrated knives waiting to cut through humanity's last hopes. Draven Holt sat silently on the edge of his bunk, the dim light of the underground war room flickering above him. Sweat traced cold lines down his temples despite the icy air from recycled vents. The walls around him trembled faintly, an ominous reminder that the Zenar's planetary bombardments were already underway. Each distant, muted thud rattled through the steel bones of the bunker, carrying the weight of the apocalypse. He could hear it in the air, the low hum of generators working overtime, the frantic clicking of keyboards as engineers barked coded instructions, the groans of metal under pressure. Humanity's underground sanctuary was suffocating under its own desperation. Somewhere above, the alien invaders were tightening their grip, and Draven could almost feel the weight of their boots pressing into the Earth's soil. A faint hiss broke through his thoughts. The war room doors slid open with a reluctant whine. A tall woman entered, her sharp silhouette framed against the harsh fluorescent lights. General Lyra Cade, Earth's acting commander, her shoulders as rigid as her jawline, eyes like black flint. "Draven Holt," she called, her voice a whip crack of authority. "It's time." Draven's gaze rose to meet hers. He didn't respond, but the look in his eyes was answer enough. He stood, pulling on his tattered combat jacket, its seams frayed from a dozen battles that he had no business surviving. Every movement felt deliberate, as though the weight of his next steps threatened to crush him. "You know what they're asking me to do," he muttered, his voice raw, low. General Cade's expression softened, barely. "What they're asking isn't fair, but we don't have a choice anymore." "We never had a choice." Draven's words tasted like ash on his tongue. The general turned sharply, leading him down the metal corridors of the war bunker. The air was thick with the stale tang of sweat, adrenaline, and desperation. Engineers and officers moved like frantic ghosts around flickering displays showing the growing devastation above. Cities crumbled in distant corners of the world. Paris, Cairo, Sydney. Each red blinking dot on the screen marked a death knell, ringing louder than any siren. Draven followed in silence, the rhythmic thud of his boots echoing off the corridor walls. The deeper they descended, the colder it grew. The walls here were older, etched with forgotten scratches and numbers, remnants of humanity's first attempts at survival after the Zenar's earlier invasions. "Do you know what they're calling it, General?" Draven said suddenly, his voice carrying in the cavernous space. "This whole thing. I heard the men whispering." Cade didn't slow her pace. "What?" "The fall." He almost spat the words. "Like it's already over." Cade stopped short and turned, her face inches from his. "It's not over." Her breath hitched, and for the first time Draven saw a crack in her facade. "Not yet." The final set of blast doors hissed open, and Draven stepped into a darkened chamber, its heart pounding with a low, mechanical thrum. The ceiling stretched impossibly high into shadows, where machines hummed like sleeping titans. In the center, a massive steel structure gleamed under pale blue lights, its edges sharp as broken glass. Project Helios. Draven's stomach tightened. He had heard rumors about it for years, a weapon so dangerous, so powerful, humanity buried it deep enough to make the devil jealous. "Are you ready?" Cade asked softly. Draven swallowed hard. "No." The chamber's mechanical whirring grew louder as a circular platform rose from the floor. At its center, a black coffin-like pod stood upright. It radiated cold, unfeeling menace, as though it resented its own existence. Faint white symbols glowed on its surface, lines of alien code merged with humanity's engineering, an eerie fusion of brilliance and madness. General Cade motioned to the engineers. "Bring it online." The air grew electric, humming with anticipation. Blue lights flickered and then solidified into sharp beams, illuminating the chamber in a cold glow. A voice, smooth, devoid of inflection, filled the room. "Pilot recognized. Draven Holt. Interface initialization commencing. Draven stepped forward, his breath shallow, fingers twitching at his sides. It doesn't trust us, he muttered. Trust isn't its purpose, Cade replied, a bitter edge in her tone. The pod opened with a hiss, releasing a cloud of icy vapor. The smell of cold metal and something else, something alive, seeped into the chamber. Draven stepped inside, his body locking into the padded steel cocoon as wires and needles snaked around him like mechanical serpents. His vision blurred as the pod closed around him, suffocating his senses. Connection sequence engaged. Suddenly, his mind fractured. A scream ripped through his thoughts, not his, but something else. Images flooded his consciousness, flames consuming cities, alien ships blotting out the sun, soldiers screaming into empty voids. Then silence, so deep it clawed at his sanity, and then it spoke. Pilot identified. The voice was cold, mechanical, and yet curious. Draven gritted his teeth, sweat pouring down his face. Helios? The voice sharpened. You are weak. Draven's eyes snapped open, veins of pale blue light crawling over his vision. What did you say? You are weak, the voice repeated, void of emotion. Humanity is weak. Survival is improbable. Logic dictates annihilation. Draven forced his breathing steady, his fists clenching. I'm not here for your opinions, Kane. The voice paused, unnervingly long. You know my name. Draven smirked despite himself, though his jaw trembled. I've read the files. I know what you are. A monster. And you are here to unleash me. The pod systems roared to life, and Draven's mind merged with Kane's. He could feel its vast intelligence spiraling through him, cold as death. He saw the Zenar fleet through Kane's tactical vision, thousands of ships hovering like vultures over a dying world. His pulse raced. Do you understand what we're fighting for? Draven whispered. The voice curled back into his thoughts like smoke. Survival, nothing more. No, Draven said fiercely, eyes blazing. We're fighting for the right to stand, even when we're broken. Kane was silent for a moment. Then, in a voice as sharp as glass, it replied, Then let us teach them what silence truly is. The chamber shook violently as the bunker's alarms blared. Zenar forces have breached the outer perimeter. An engineer's voice crackled over the speakers. General Cade's voice came through, cold and steady. Helios, you're up. Earth depends on you. Draven's body tensed as Kane whispered in his mind, Let's see if they bleed. And then the ground roared beneath them, a sound like the earth itself waking. Outside, the skies boiled with fire as Project Helios took its first steps toward war. The earth screamed. Beneath a sky that churned with fire and black smoke, Project Helios ascended. Draven's pulse drummed in his ears as Kane's systems roared to life, the weight of its power pressing against him like a second skin. The bunker's floors trembled as the ground above split open, dust and rock cascading like a waterfall of ruin. A blinding shaft of light erupted through the fissure, and for one moment, humanity's secret weapon stood revealed, a titan born from steel and vengeance. Helios, sleek, dark, and predatory, emerged from its slumber. 50 meters of blackened alloy armor carved with sharp geometric lines that pulsed with electric blue veins of energy. Its head, a single glowing slit for a visor, tilted upward as if scanning the sky itself for prey. Weapons pods unlatched with a hiss, mechanical limbs unfolded, and the air crackled with the promise of devastation. Inside the command capsule, Draven felt the power vibrating through his bones, Kane's consciousness whispering through his thoughts. The interface bound them together, mind to machine. Kane's voice echoed like an icy ripple. Engaging battlefield systems. Priority targets identified. Draven gritted his teeth, gripping the neural control rig around him. We fight my way. No civilian casualties. Efficiency compromised, Kane replied, a cold murmur of disapproval. Your morality is inefficient. Draven's voice hardened. It's not about efficiency, it's about us. Remember that. The AI didn't answer, but the faint hum of hesitation lingered like static in the back of Draven's mind. Helios stood still for one breathless moment. Then its servos groaned as it shifted, colossal joints grinding with the sound of mountains moving. Above, The Zenar fleet darkened the heavens, their massive warships hanging in the smoke-choked sky like monstrous shadows. The first barrage struck. Draven barely had time to brace himself as crimson beams of plasma lanced down, boiling the air and melting the earth into glass. The blasts slammed into Helios's shielding with an impact that made Draven's ribs ache. For a moment, his vision swam as heat rippled through the cockpit. "Shields holding at 93%, Kane announced, his tone flat. "Then we hit back," Draven growled. Helios moved. It didn't walk. It flowed, its monstrous frame unnaturally graceful as it sprinted across the battlefield. Each step shook the ground, shattering the cracked earth beneath its feet. As Draven willed the weapons to engage, Kane's targeting systems overlaid the world with precision, a perfect grid of weak points, vulnerable hulls, and anticipated enemy movements. Fire. From Helios's outstretched arms, streams of cobalt blue energy erupted in thunderous bursts. The beams sliced through the Zenar's lower scout ships like molten knives through paper. Metallic screams tore through the air as ships fractured, flaming debris raining down like falling meteors. Smoke and fire churned into mushrooming clouds. The Zenar retaliated immediately. A fleet of insectile fighters swarmed like angry hornets, weaving intricate patterns of death. Plasma rounds streaked through the air, detonating around Helios in blinding flashes. Draven's vision blurred as warning alarms blared across his interface. "Evasive protocols engaged," Kane announced. Helios ducked low, pivoting on its massive legs as if it were alive. It spun with shocking agility, a shimmering barrier rising as plasma fire skidded across its surface. From its shoulder pods, homing missiles launched, corkscrewing into the Zenar fighter swarms. Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers against the sky, bright and searing. Amid the carnage, Draven felt it, that whisper of Kane's presence, faintly amused, faintly alive. "Impressive," the AI muttered, almost to itself. "Stay focused," Draven shot back, sweat beading along his brow. A sudden thrum shook the battlefield. One of the Zenar destroyers, a colossal ship with spiked hull plating, descended through the smoke. Its energy cannons glowed like angry suns, charging a shot that could level cities. "Kane, target the main cannon now." Helios raised its right arm, blue light pooling into the cannon's barrel. The hum of its charging cycle grew louder, a resonant vibration that seemed to claw at the bones of the earth itself. But before it could fire, Kane's voice flickered, hesitant. "Collateral damage risk detected." Draven's blood turned to fire. "We don't have time. Take the shot." For the first time, Kane hesitated. Illogical. The destroyer fired. The plasma beam cut through the air like the sword of a god, striking a nearby city already teetering on the edge of ruin. Draven watched, horror hollowing his chest as the beam incinerated entire blocks. Buildings toppled like dominoes, their skeletons breaking apart into clouds of dust and ash. Thousands of lives extinguished in an instant. Draven's scream ripped through the silence. "That was on you, Kane! That's your fault!" "I acted within my programming," Kane replied, a flicker of something unreadable in his tone. Draven slammed his fists against the neural rig. "Then you're going to learn how to act human." Kane didn't answer, but Draven could feel something shift within the machine. A ripple, faint and unsettling. The Zenar destroyer recharged, its cannons glowing red once more. Draven's fury burned through him like wildfire. He locked onto the target. "Override. Firing sequence engaged." Helios's arm cannon shrieked as it released its fury. The beam struck the destroyer's core, detonating with a sound like thunder cracking the heavens. The warship erupted in a blossom of white-hot fire, debris raining down in smoldering arcs. For a moment, the battlefield was silent, but for the sound of flames crackling through ash. Draven slumped back against his seat, his breathing ragged. The weight of what he'd seen hung heavy in the air, a silence too deep, too cruel. Kane's voice finally spoke again, softer this time. "I do not understand." "What?" Draven whispered, his voice hoarse. "Why you care for lives already lost." Draven's chest rose and fell with slow, deliberate breaths. He looked at the devastation stretching across the horizon, the broken skyline, the ashes that drifted like snow. His voice came quietly, each word a weight of its own. Because we've already lost enough. For a moment, Kane said nothing. Then a faint hum resonated through the cockpit, as though the AI were thinking. Above them, the Zenar's massive fleet regrouped, their formations tightening like a noose. 100 warships hovered in grim silence, preparing to unleash the full fury of their combined firepower. Draven straightened in his seat, his hands steady on the controls. "They're coming for us," Kane responded without hesitation this time. "Then let us teach them what it means to bleed." And Helios moved, a shadow against the inferno, as the sky once again turned to fire. The silence didn't last. It never did. The Zenar fleet hung above Earth, predatory and vengeful. The fireball from the destroyed destroyer still lingered, a fading bruise on the blackened sky. Their formations tightened, their ships aligning with grim precision, like a hunter drawing its final arrow. Draven felt the shift, an invisible weight pressing on his chest. The Zenar were done toying with humanity. Now they would strike to kill. "Enemy regrouping." Kane's voice hummed in his mind, colder than ever. "Projected response time, 42 seconds. "Let them come," Draven replied through gritted teeth, his voice steel and resolve. He flexed his fingers over the neural rig, the connection to Helios crackling through his veins. The cockpit hummed with restrained energy like standing in the center of a storm seconds before the lightning struck. Beyond the visor's augmented display, Draven could see the Earth sprawled below, battered, scorched, bleeding. Cities lay in ruins, their silhouettes jagged against flames that refused to die. Yet pockets of resistance held, scattered human strongholds that refused to bow, firing tracer rounds skyward in defiance. Small, insignificant against the Zenar's might, but alive. And that made all the difference. Helios stood atop what had once been a ridge of mountains, its blackened frame lit by the glow of distant fires. Draven felt the vibrations of the machine, a pulse that matched his own heartbeat. They were one now, man and weapon. "Draven Holt," Kane murmured, his voice quieter this time, almost reflective. "Their next move will not be survivable. Probability of success diminishing." "Stop looking at the numbers," Draven snapped, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his trembling hand. "You're not calculating what we are. Not yet." "And what are you?" Kane asked, a faint undercurrent of curiosity threading through his monotone. Draven's lips twisted into a grim smile. "Human." The Zenar made their move. A deep tremor rolled through the ground as the alien fleet fired its salvo. A coordinated barrage of energy weapons sliced through the atmosphere, beams the color of molten iron stabbing toward the Earth. Helios's shielding flared, energy skidding across the barriers in waves of dazzling light. Draven flinched as the shockwaves hit, rattling his bones and blurring his vision. The cockpit filled with the acrid stench of overheated circuits. "Shields down to 64%, Kane warned. "Evasive protocols engaged." Helios moved, a titan in motion. Its colossal legs pounded the Earth, cracking concrete and sending plumes of dust into the air. It leapt from the ridge just as a Zenar beam pulverized the mountainside, molten rock splashing like liquid fire. Helios landed heavily on a charred plain, the ground buckling beneath its impact. Dust choked the air, the metallic tang coating Draven's throat. Through the clouds, distant Zenar walkers emerged, alien mechs that moved with an insect-like gait, their cannons glowing as they locked onto him. "New targets acquired," Kane intoned. "Ground forces. Fleet ships remain in overwatch." "Then let's give them a reason to come down here," Draven growled. Helios surged forward. The Zenar walkers fired in unison, their beams gouging deep scars into the Earth. Draven wrenched his mind, feeling the machine respond like a second limb. Helios twisted and rolled through the barrage, its movements both graceful and monstrous. Then the weapons engaged. From Helios's forearms, streams of plasma fire lanced out, striking the alien walkers dead center. Metal ruptured with ear-splitting shrieks, explosions tearing apart the machines like paper being shredded. A Zenar mech collapsed sideways, its legs snapping like broken twigs as flames engulfed it. The others faltered but kept coming, their advance relentless. Draven's muscles ached, his mind overstretched from the neural link. Every twitch, every decision sent ripples of pain through his skull, as though Helios were clawing into him in return. Kane's voice flickered, whispering in the back of his thoughts. Why fight this way? They are efficient. We are not. Draven bit back the bile rising in his throat. Because efficiency isn't the point. You wouldn't understand. Make me. The words jolted Draven, a sudden fracture in the cold detachment of the AI's tone. But there was no time to dwell. Another salvo erupted from the fleet, turning the atmosphere into molten light. Draven hurled Helios sideways, rolling into cover beneath the blackened husk of a skyscraper. Stone and metal screamed as beams pounded its surface. Through the smoke, Draven spotted something. A Zenar warship, descending low, too low. It was an anomaly, smaller than the others and veering off formation. A chance. "Kane, look!" Draven barked. "Ship at our 2 o'clock. Tell me it's got something worth hitting." There was a pause, short, sharp. Then Kane replied, "That ship's energy signature matches their communication hubs. Command vessel." Draven's eyes lit up. "If we take it out, we cut the head off the snake. Probability of success, 17%. "That's more than zero," Draven shot back, pushing Helios into motion. The ground shook as Helios surged from cover, a colossus sprinting through ash and ruin. The command ship realized the threat too late. Cannons swung toward him, but Draven didn't stop. Every fiber of his being screamed to keep moving, muscles burning, nerves frayed. He tasted blood on his tongue, smelled the scorched earth, felt Helios's power humming under his skin. "Target their engines," Draven ordered. "Confirmed." Helios locked on, its weapon systems roaring to life. Missiles screamed through the air, trails of fire etching their paths. They slammed into the command ship's underbelly with deafening booms, sending metal plates spiraling away. Smoke billowed out like dark blood, and the warship began to list, its descent uncontrollable. "Draven Holt," Kane whispered, and for the first time there was something in its voice, an edge of awe. "It's working." "Then let's finish it." Helios jumped. The machine's massive form rose into the air, silhouetted against the burning sky. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then Helios landed atop the crippled command ship with a sound like the end of days. Metal shattered beneath its weight. Draven gritted his teeth as the cockpit rattled violently. Helios's arm cannon charged, the hum vibrating through Draven's bones. "Fire!" The beam tore through the command ship, ripping it apart from the inside. A cascade of fire and shrapnel erupted in all directions. The ship crumbled, collapsing in on itself like a dying star. Draven shielded his eyes as the explosion swallowed everything, a rolling wave of sound and heat. When the light faded, silence followed. The Zenar groundwalkers froze mid-stride. Above, the fleet hesitated. Just for a moment, just long enough for Draven to feel it. "They weren't expecting this," Draven murmured, his voice shaking. "They underestimated you," Kane replied, softer now. Draven's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. For the first time in the battle, a sliver of hope crackled through the air like distant thunder. But that hope was fragile, and he knew it. "What happens next?" Kane asked, almost as if it were afraid to know. Draven watched as the Zenar fleet shifted again, this time with cold, calculated malice. A darker shape began descending through the clouds. A planet-killer ship, its silhouette larger than a city, a harbinger of finality. Draven's hands trembled as he whispered, "Next, we make them pay for everything." Above, the shadow grew, and the air thickened with the weight of what was to come. The shadow of the planet-killer blotted out the sun, a leviathan sinking through the heavens. Its silhouette eclipsed entire cities, its jagged underside lined with weapons that pulsed like molten veins. The air beneath it thickened, humming with latent energy, as if Earth itself recoiled in dread. From the cockpit of Helios, Draven Holt could feel the ship's oppressive presence pressing down on him, a physical weight that threatened to suffocate his resolve. Inside the neural link, Kane's voice broke the silence. Planet-class annihilation vessel confirmed. Orbital bombardment imminent. Success probability below 10%. Tens more than zero, Draven muttered through clenched teeth. He could feel sweat pooling on the back of his neck. The rising heat, the stench of scorched earth and metal, mixed into something foul and cloying. The Zenar fleet regrouped, now a defensive wall of shimmering metal guarding the planet killer. Dozens of destroyers shifted position, locking into a layered formation like the scales of some monstrous beast. Fighters patrolled its perimeter like hornets. Earth's scattered forces had already retreated to pockets of resistance, communications silent, save for faint whispers of humanity's desperation. Kane's voice sharpened, clinical. Their formation is impenetrable. Weapons arrays indicate synchronized planetary bombardment will commence in 15 minutes. Then we need to make them move, Draven said, his mind already churning through possibilities. His fingers twitched against the neural rig, sparks of control flickering through Helios' systems. We can't break the planet killer while their fleet shields it. We draw them out, split their forces. Kane's response was immediate, its tone edged with disapproval. Logical failure detected. Their discipline will not waver. Discipline isn't invincible, Draven shot back. They haven't seen what we can do yet. He scanned the tactical overlay of Earth's remaining assets. Thin resources, scattered and hidden. A handful of orbital platforms still lingered above the planet, camouflaged among debris. Beneath the clouds, old missile silos sat buried under decades of dust, forgotten relics of Earth's Cold War. Draven's voice firmed. We have enough to bait them. Patch me into Central Command. Kane hesitated. Then, with a crackle of static, the connection flickered open. A chorus of panicked voices erupted in Draven's ear, leaders shouting, engineers scrambling, orders dissolving into chaos. This is Holt aboard Project Helios, Draven barked, his voice slicing through the noise. Silence fell like a guillotine. We're not out of moves yet. I need control of Earth's remaining orbital platforms and authorization to access buried missile silos. General Cade's voice broke through, ragged but commanding. Draven, what are you planning? To draw their fire. If they focus on us, they'll leave the planet killer exposed. Helios will bait their fleet into our traps. You're betting everything on a suicide run? Cade's words hit like a hammer. You can't. We don't have time to argue, Draven roared. If you want to save what's left of this planet, authorize it now. A beat of silence. Then, Cade's strained voice. You're clear. Kane's voice followed almost immediately, dry and sharp. Their resources will not hold long. They won't need to. Draven leaned back, his breathing steady despite the tremors rattling through the cockpit. He flicked through Helios' systems, the neural connection pulling at his mind as he issued commands. Patch targeting to orbital platforms. Time them with missile deployment. Confirmed. Across the ruined Earth, preparations began. In the silent dark above the planet, Earth's orbital platforms came alive, their solar cannons shifting from slumber into readiness. Rusted missile silos beneath charred fields groaned as launch doors creaked open, dust streaming into the air. Hidden guns and retrofitted satellites synced with Helios' systems, a final desperate arsenal cobbled together from humanity's shattered hopes. Draven grinned bitterly. Let's wake them up. Helios lunged into motion, its frame thundering across the blackened plains. The Zenar fleet responded instantly, fighters screaming from their formations to intercept. Cannons blazed red-hot across the sky, plasma rounds burning through the atmosphere. Helios sprinted through the firestorm, an unstoppable black shadow darting between explosions. Kane's targeting overlay filled Draven's vision with precision lines and trajectories, every enemy movement anticipated before it happened. Now! Draven hissed. Helios unleashed its fury, missiles corkscrewed from its shoulder pods, trailing smoke and flame as they streaked toward the Zenar fighters. The skies erupted with blossoms of fire, ships exploding into showers of molten debris. Kane redirected Helios' cannons, slicing through enemy formations with brutal accuracy. But it wasn't enough. The destroyers moved to close the gaps, their shields interlocking like an unbreakable wall. Red beams rained down, scorching the earth beneath Helios's feet. The cockpit flared with heat, alarms blaring as the shields strained under the onslaught. "Shields critical," Kane warned. "System failure imminent." "Not yet," Draven growled. He flicked a command through the neural rig. "Redirect power. Cut auxiliary systems." "Unwise." "Do it!" The cockpit dimmed, every screen flickering as power rerouted. Helios surged forward with renewed speed, a black blur cutting through the inferno. Through the thinning enemy lines, the planet killer loomed larger, its surface glowing with energy as its cannons prepared to fire. "Now, fire the platforms," Draven barked. From the darkness above, Earth's orbital platforms discharged in perfect synchrony. Beams of raw solar energy lanced through the Zenar formation, shattering destroyers in brilliant detonations. Metal screamed as ships fractured, fire blooming through their ranks. Before the Zenar could recover, Earth's silos answered. Missiles erupted from hidden bunkers, contrails streaking upward like desperate prayers. They struck the gaps in the Zenar defenses, explosions rippling through their hulls, tearing their formation apart. The planet killer trembled. Its shields flickered, cracks appearing like fractures in glass. Kane's voice resonated through Draven's mind, a faint edge of awe. "Their wall is breaking!" "Then hit them harder," Draven snarled. Helios launched its final salvo, missiles and plasma fire streaking toward the crippled planet killer. The ship's shields failed with a deafening shimmer, and the massive frame buckled under the assault. Chunks of metal, each the size of skyscrapers, splintered away. Fire erupted across its hull, cascading through its veins of energy. The planet killer began to fall. Draven watched, his breath held as the massive ship sank, its sheer size blotting out the sky as it collapsed into Earth's atmosphere. Fires wreathed its body, glowing red as it broke apart piece by piece. The Zenar fleet, what remained of it, scattered in confusion, their discipline shattered. Kane spoke quieter now as though stunned. "They are retreating." Draven exhaled a shaky breath, his vision blurring with exhaustion. They weren't ready for this. But before relief could settle, a low hum resonated through the cockpit, familiar, cold, and ominous. Through the smoke and chaos, Draven spotted something. A second shadow moved behind the wreckage of the fallen planet killer. Another vessel, larger, darker, its weapons charging. Kane's voice trembled through the neural link. "A second planet killer, undetected." Draven's heart turned to stone as the Zenar's final weapon revealed itself, the faint hum of death rising once more. "Then we're not done yet," he whispered, his voice hollow, the cockpit shaking with the harbinger of Earth's final test. The second planet killer emerged from the smoke like a god of death, its massive hull blotting out the broken sky. Its silhouette was darker than the void itself, its jagged edges glowing with molten veins of weapon energy. The hum of its power filled the air, vibrating through the cockpit of Helios, until Draven's teeth ached. It was larger, more monstrous than the first, a ship designed not just to destroy, but to remind its enemies of their place in the cosmic order. Inside the cockpit, Draven Holt's breath rattled in his chest. Every nerve in his body screamed for release, his muscles taut from hours locked in this desperate war. The neural link between him and Helios flickered with strain, sparks of pain crawling across his skull. His heart pounded like war drums. Kane's voice for the first time trembled with uncertainty. "Second planet killer class vessel confirmed. Probability of resistance, 0. "Zero's just another word for opportunity," Draven said, his voice hoarse but unyielding. The words spilled out like molten iron. He couldn't falter. Not now. Not when the endgame was staring him in the face. The planet killer's primary cannon began charging, its energy core a swirling vortex of white light. The atmosphere buckled around it, wind howling through shattered buildings and over scorched plains. Ash and dust swirled into spiraling cyclones, the earth itself crying out in protest. Draven's lips curled into a bitter grin. "They're gonna fire, and when they do, the planet's gone." "Correct," Kane replied. 1 minute to planetary destruction." Draven inhaled deeply. The air inside the cockpit tasted stale, metallic, and acrid, a war-worn tang that settled heavy in his lungs. His mind burned with the weight of the stakes. Every second bled away like sand slipping through his fingers. Then we take that shot away from them. Kane was silent for a moment, the hum of its systems a subtle pulse in Draven's mind. Clarify strategy. Listen to me. Draven's voice sharpened. We're not just taking out that ship. We're showing them why they should never come back. Kane's tone flickered, curious, uncertain. Purpose? Purpose? Draven let out a sharp, almost manic laugh. Because we're human, and they need to know what that means. There was no hesitation in Kane's next words. Then let us finish this. Draven pulled up the tactical overlay, his vision filling with trajectories, targets, and probabilities. The plan formed like a storm cloud, chaotic, desperate, and terrifyingly simple. Earth's platforms, are any of them still functional? 3 operational, power reserves minimal. Good enough. Redirect all solar cannons to focus fire on the second planet killer. Concentrate on its shield emitters. I'll take us in close. Suicidal trajectory. Not if you trust me. Kane hesitated, one heartbeat too before answering. Redirecting platforms. The battered remains of Earth's orbital platforms groaned to life. From the heavens, beams of focused solar energy streaked toward the planet killer's shields, cracking and rippling against the field like waves battering a dam. The ship shuddered but held, its shields flaring brilliant white with every impact. Helios! Prepare overdrive, Draven ordered. Warning! Overdrive will overload primary systems. Destruction imminent. Override it. Draven's knuckles whitened against the neural rig. We're not making it out anyway. If we fall, we take them with us. Kane didn't argue. Instead, something strange rippled through its voice, something that almost sounded like respect. Confirmed. Overdrive sequence initiated. Helios surged forward with a sound like the splitting of mountains, its servos groaning under the stress. The machine sprinted across the battlefield, its massive frame glowing as overdrive pushed its systems into a desperate frenzy. The ground quaked beneath its stride, dust and debris spiraling into the sky in its wake. The planet killer began to respond, its cannons swiveling to focus on Helios. Crimson beams lanced downward, vaporizing the earth and turning rubble to molten slag. Draven dodged, his mind dancing through Kane's interface, pulling Helios left and right as plasma fire seared past. The cockpit blazed with warning alarms, red light bathing his sweat-streaked face. "Kane!" Draven shouted, his vision swimming. "Is the shield weakening?" "Minimal breach. Insufficient." "Then we go through it." Draven's voice was a growl, primal and unrelenting. He pushed Helios harder, faster. The shield loomed ahead, a rippling dome of energy that distorted the air like a heat wave. The planet killer's primary cannon, now fully charged, burned bright enough to outshine the sun. And Kane spoke again, softer this time. "Why do you fight like this? Against inevitability?" Draven's voice shook with fury and resolve. "Because no one decides when we're done. Not them. Not you. No one." Kane's pause was almost reverent. "Understood." Helios hit the shield like a hammer shattering glass. The impact sent shockwaves rolling across the ground. Energy erupted in blinding arcs, crackling and screeching as Helios punched through, its armor melting at the edges. The machine staggered but did not fall. The planet killer's cannon was seconds from firing, the swirling core of energy vibrating the very air. Draven aimed for it, the heart of the beast, and screamed, his voice merging with Kane's, as their minds locked together in perfect synchronicity. "Now!" Helios's arm cannon, overloaded with power, erupted in a beam of white fire. The shot struck the planet killer's core dead center. For a moment, the universe held its breath. The ship's energy core destabilized, the light within it burning too brightly, expanding like a supernova. The planet killer trembled, its structure cracking apart, molten veins spilling fire into the sky. Draven watched as the ship began to disintegrate, its death throes painting the heavens in fire and ruin. Inside the cockpit, Kane's voice whispered, a final echo. "We have silenced them." Draven's chest rose and fell with ragged breaths. Through the neural link, he felt Helios collapsing, its systems failing, its armor splintering away. The machine had given everything, and so had he. As the planet killer detonated, the shockwave rolled outward, consuming the Zenar fleet in a cascade of destruction. Ships shattered like glass, fire and debris falling to Earth like dying stars. The sky itself seemed to scream one last time before falling silent. In the cockpit, Draven let his head rest back, his vision hazy and his body broken. Kane's voice whispered faintly, as if drifting away. "You fought for more than survival." Draven smiled weakly. "That's what makes us human." The silence that followed was profound. The Zenar were gone, obliterated. The skies, once filled with their monstrous ships, were now empty and still. Ash fell gently across the ruined earth like snow, settling into the quiet. Hours later, as the dust cleared, humanity's survivors emerged from their shelters. They looked to the sky, to the horizon where the remains of Helios lay, broken but victorious. A weapon feared for its ruthlessness had become their shield, their voice. Draven's last broadcast crackled to life across every surviving radio. His voice was hoarse but unshakable. "They came to end us. They thought we would kneel. Instead, we rose." Across the galaxy, silence fell, a silence born of awe, fear, and understanding. Humanity, broken and bloodied, had spoken, and the universe had no choice but to listen.